Hello, everybody. All right, welcome to the Mikestand. Today is, of course, Tuesday, January the 6th, 2025. Hopefully, everybody's having a good having a good week thus far. So I'm a little late. I was caught up doing some other things. Sometimes that happens. Get distracted, but we're still going to give people a chance to come in before we get started. Um, Again, if you guys haven't already, you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream. See if we can get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here we talk about grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So, as I said, with that being said, I did watch some more. Watch about 5 more cartoons from April 1940, including the first one for the first Popeye cartoon of that year. Um, I believe it might have been the first cartoon that was actually produced upon their return to New York. I think, if I recall correctly, on their way to Rio. It was the final time that Dave Barry had voiced Bluto before Jackson Beck took over, and of course before just before this is also around, even though some sources credited Margie Hines in that. Actually, it might have been the last cartoon, produced in Miami. But there was that one. There was also, of course, Bugs Bunny Nips and Nips, which you can't really see on TV anymore, and you really have to look for it, because they basically have taken it out of rotation due to some of the racial stereotyping of Japanese people. But we also have to understand about it too is it was made at a time when Japan was our enemy, you know. And even though there were Japanese groups that didn't care for it because of some of the stereotyping, when you look at it in its proper context, you know, in other words, you look back and you can still appreciate the humor of the cartoon, you know, you just have to ignore the stereotyping there, but because look at it from a point of view that at the time we viewed Japan as our enemies. So, but anyways, wow, I've already talked enough to where we're already past the 3 minute mark. All right, so here's what's on tap for tonight. Then, as we just past the 3.5 minute mark, heading into the 4 minute mark. Tonight, I do have one article I'm going to go over from Bounding into comics related. It's going to talk about how the independent comics seem to be, according to at least the author that we're going to be looking at tonight. And no, it's not Avi Green. It's actually one of the other authors. In fact, it's funny because it doesn't seem like now maybe he's just taking some time off or whatever, but it doesn't seem like Avi's really been as active of late, or if he's even involved with Bounty. I don't, again, don't know. But with all that being said, um, we're gonna, of course, we're gonna sit around wait for, you know, um, oh wait, I'm sorry, we've already sat around waiting for people to come in. Um, what we're gonna do here now is we're gonna go over that one story from Bleeding Fool about how independent comic creators seem to be outplaying Marvel and DC, at least according to this one writer. Then we'll get caught up on all the latest in wrestling news. Look back to last night's Monday Night Raw. Look ahead to tonight's NXT, which of course would feature some NXT and TNA talent. Um, some more news obviously coming out as we make our way towards the Royal Rumble at the end of the month, and then we'll wrap things up with this day in each history. And again, a friendly reminder to both my Rumble and my YouTube viewers, if you haven't already, if you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream, see if we can get some more friendly people to engage. That'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions, and I will try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So with that being said, why don't we go ahead and get started with the story at hand. Pull that up here as soon as I find it. And we're just going to be going over just the one story tonight. So, how creator-owned comics are beginning to outplay Marvel and DC. Article by Jameson Ashley, published January 3rd, 2026, which of course was this past Saturday. So let's go ahead and look into this. All right, so mainstream American comics are not in good shape, no matter how many press releases celebrate quote-unquote growth in the wider comics market. Now, we have seen some examples of this. Of course, as you guys know, we went over some numbers. Marvel has been really Marvel and Image have been taking some hits. IDW, is not even as active anymore, it would seem. DC seems to be doing okay, but let's see. The real story is that the classic single issue model that once made Marvel and DC cultural giants is losing new readers, while other formats and business models move ahead. The old system looks strong from a distance, but up close, it resembles a brand that is coasting on past glory while its audience quietly walks away. I don't know if I totally if he's talking about like single issues, here and there. I don't think that's necessarily I think a lot of people could still do that, but I think the thing that is doing more is more of these story arcs that go 5-6 issues, like the mini series and all that. But you can still have as long as you make it as real as possible, like they did back in the golden age. These episodic issues can be can work out. Where maybe a story takes place a week or over a month's time. Go month by month. I don't think it's a bad story model, the episodic story model, but you just have to make it compelling and not put too much into the story that is try to stay as neutral as possible in the storytelling. Don't push either particular agenda. Just keep it simple. Good guys, bad guys. Anyways, industry studies in recent years have shown that single issue sales in the North American direct market have been sliding since the mid 2010s, with a sharp drop around 2017 as readers drifted elsewhere. At the same time, graphic novels and manga in bookstores saw explosive growth, with one report noting a 123% jump in that segment in a single year between 2020 and 2021. That split tells a simple story. Money is flowing into comics as a medium, yet The traditional floppy that built the big two is becoming a niche product rather than the backbone of the business. So basically, what they're saying is that the floppies are now becoming a niche within the niche, even though, as noted, um, as noted, niche. Let's see. Um, think here. Okay, so people are going more right now for what they're saying is people going more for the like graphic novels and manga, which has more of a like ongoing story. Now, granted, the episodic titles had somewhat of maybe not as complex. They also had somewhat of an ongoing story, over time. So, you didn't see people, aging and all that, but so the core problem is that Marvel and DC have made their own universes nearly impossible for newcomers to enter. Take Spider Man as the most obvious example. On paper, he is supposed to be a relatable teenager dealing with power and responsibility. Well, that was his original concept, but there have been moves to make have him progress into growing into adulthood and be family man and stuff. You know, um, and they've done that. You know, and you could also even in the episodic format, you could still have them kind of over time, mature. You could still have time pass as it normally would. Him growing from teenager to young adult, to college age young adult to you'd still have a story work out like that over years, even in an episodic title. In practice, a new fan who loved a recent film walks into a shop and sees a wall of Spider Man titles with different versions, timelines, and tones, none of which match the movie. Faced with multiple universes, endless reboots, and a mountain of backstory, many people do not pick a lane at all. They put their wallet away and leave. That confusion helps explain why the Marvel movies can claim global box office records, while the monthly books tied to those same brands cannot convert that attention into steady sales. Now, again, but this also kind of goes back to the idea of it depends upon what you're wanting to do with that too. It's like, are you wanting to make the movies their own universe, or are you wanting them to be more in line with the comics? With the traditional comics. If you can make them more in line with the traditional comics, that would probably help. But, if you're wanting to make the movie, if you're wanting to make the movie its own universe, then you might as well just do what I've seen even happen in some occasions is when you do have other, like they did this more back in the 90s and 2000s, so if some of you may remember like Batman the animated series, the DCAU, the DC animated universe was like Batman the animated series, Superman the animated series, Zeta Project, Static Shock, Justice League Unlimited, those shows. And then on the Marvel side, you had, of course, X-Men and Spider-Man the Animated Adventures, as well as Iron Man and, as part of the Marvel Superheroes Hour, Iron Man, the Incredible Hulk, and Fantastic Four, with, of course, other members of the Marvel universe like Captain America and Thor making guest appearances. What they would do back then, right, is with those titles, they'd actually make comic books that were dedicated to that universe, right? Maybe for the movie titles, if they are successful, maybe they ought to make a comic book that is more specific to the movie, the cinematic universe. Just a thought. Something you call the Marvel Cinematic Universe (MCU). Maybe make comics that are specific for that particular brand for those who want to enjoy that continuity and try to build that continuity up. You can still have the more traditional stories, the main story. Like for me, I grew up watching Super Friends. Now, granted, I didn't grow up reading comics like a lot of people do. I grew up watching Super Friends. And when I started reading comics, when I got older, in my adult years, I actually kind of enjoyed, looking back and seeing, the comic versions that were, particularly the Golden Age comic versions that were somewhat different from, that's part of the reason why I do the historical comic retrospect is to, try to, at least give people samples. Hey, look, you guys might want to check this stuff out. We might give you a primer by reading a story or two from particular comic. Maybe you decide, okay, yeah, I want to go see that book. I want to go see that title. Maybe I'll go look for that. But so the arguments he's making thus far are just basically that basically the old model doesn't work as well, and maybe it doesn't. But I think also other aspects of it too. But anyways, on top of that, the big publishers have leaned into event culture as their main business engine. Instead of clean one and done stories or tight limited series, readers are handed sprawling crossover events that sprawl across dozens of that can be that's the best idea of the episodic titles, right? The one and done stories, or a tight limited series that that basically focuses in on a specific story arc instead of endless crossovers. To follow one plot, a customer is pushed into buying tie-ins, one-shots, and side minis just to avoid missing key chapters. That turns reading into a scavenger hunt with a high price tag, not an inviting hobby for middle-class families already navigating inflation and rising entertainment costs. These events do not feel like long-term investments in new readers. They feel like a strategy to squeeze a shrinking loyal base just a little harder each year. Yeah, unfortunately, that is kind of the problem with the big companies, as some people call them, the corpos, is that they are trying. I mean, look. If you've been following our historical comic retrospect, right? A lot of the comics that we're reading from back in the 30s and 40s were like 10 cents, and they were 10 cents for a long time. They were 10 cents pretty much from the very beginning of when comic books became a thing back in like the early to mid 30s. 1933 was the first comic book, and then 35 really started going with more regular publishing. And then until they actually did have to increase the prices by adding 2 cents, 12 cents back in the mid 60s. Now, granted, books were different back then. Back when they started back in the 30s and 40s, you'd be getting 8 or 9 stories. You'd be getting in some of those the earliest anthologies, you were getting like 28 to 30 stories but they were like 1-2 pages at a time, and they were kind of like, some of them were serial where they would be following. And then as time went on, the page count shrunk from like 64 to 48. And then by the time you were having like 48 pages, you were getting like 5 or 6 stories in there. But on average, they were about 8 pages each. You have some that were like your big characters like Superman, Batman. They were like 12 pages, and then maybe some of your lesser known characters might be 6 to 8 pages. So your headliners were usually 12 to 13 pages. Your second tier guys were maybe like 10 to 12 pages, and then your tertiary guys were like 8 to 10 pages, and then usually your below that you'd have under 8, anywhere from 5 to 7 pages. So anyways, digital distribution could have been the lifeline that changed everything, yet American publishers have treated it like a threat to the old system rather than an opportunity to grow. Subscription services offer large back catalogs for a monthly fee, but new issues are held back for months. In a media environment where fans expect to participate in online buzz, the moment a story hits, making them wait a quarter of a year for quote unquote new content, is an invitation to check out and move on. Meanwhile, manga platforms provide near simultaneous digital access, keeping young readers in the habit of showing up each week for fresh chapters. The difference is not technology, it is attitude. There is, however, a lesson hiding in plain sight. Independent publishers and creator-owned lines have found loyal audiences by offering stories with clear beginnings, middles, and endings. Again, the big point of being, storytelling, right? Which is actually what the older, he's saying that it's the formatting, but I think he's alluding more to here is storytelling style. Because even in those older episodic titles, they at least did have a clear beginning, middle, and ending. They did work, and they still can work if it's done right. These books respect the reader's time and wallet. New customers can jump into a volume knowing they are not signing up for decades of homework just to understand why two people in capes were punching each other on page 1. That same preference shows up in the boom in graphic novels and manga, where readers vote with their money for complete accessible narratives over confusing webs of continuity. This is where crowdfunding enters the picture as the most promising escape route from the old trap. Crowdfunded comics on platforms like Kickstarter, Fund My Comic, and similar services give creators a way to go directly to readers without asking permission from corporate middle managers who are terrified of taking responsibility for creative risk. Backers know exactly what they are getting: a single graphic novel, a short series with a fixed length, a story that ships when it is done. Creators own the work. Readers decide whether it is worth supporting. When a project succeeds, the money goes to the people actually making the book instead of being swallowed by a giant apparatus that keeps telling fans to wait for the next reboot. I mean, I could see if they are trying to attract new people and they're wanting to, they can always with the little, maybe with the first page kind of give a quick and like for Superman, for example, right? If they wanted to really give people at least somewhat of a crust of so they understand the continuity, they could always kind of do like what they used to do, like for example, is part of the openings of some of the Superman like serials and TV shows where they talk about him being born on a planet Krypton and all that. They could theoretically do that if they want it. They want to at least help people understand some of the continuity aspects of it. Yeah. All right. So, anyways, we continue on now. Let me see here. Crowdfunding also solves the problem of trust in a way that big publishers no longer can. Fans who have been burned by bait and switch events or shallow relaunches can look at a campaign page, see the pitch, preview pages, and a track record of the team. Then make a direct choice if they like the book. They can back it at a level that fits their budget. If they do not, they walk away without having to wade through a catalog of confusing variant covers and tie-in checkers. Yeah, I think sometimes the whole idea of the variant covers is a little. I mean, they got by with just one cover back in the day, so I think that's just. It is a cleaner, more honest relationship built around specific books instead of vague promises that, quote unquote, the line will improve next summer. And again, if anything, a friendly reminder to everybody, if you haven't already, if you guys can help out by liking and sharing the stream, see if we can get some more friendly people to engage, that'd be appreciated. Also, if anything here grabs your attention, feel free to comment and or ask questions, and I will try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. So, as we, of course, are continuing on here. Supporters of the Big Two will constantly report that overall industry numbers look positive. They will highlight projections that show the total U.S. comic market growing in the years ahead and note that Marvel and DC still hold the largest slices of that pie. Those numbers are not meaningless, but they do not erase the central problem described in the transcript and summary. Growth concentrated in graphic novels, manga, digital bundles, and specialty channels does not prove the health of the old monthly superhero model. It proves that readers are staying with visual storytelling while quietly walking around the legacy brands that refuse to change. Yeah, again, here's my response to that statement, though. Yeah, they do need to change. They do need to evolve. Eventually, Clark, eventually, you can always go back and look at Clark's adventures, both in the Golden and Silver Age. But eventually, time needs to move on. Clark needs to, of course, age out, move on, and maybe even pass away more naturally, not some catastrophic fight against Doomsday, but just, even showing that Kryptonians, have a finite existence. Let Jonathan be, and not the Jonathan that they're giving us who is this like, oh, he's got this non-binary boyfriend, would have, all this garbage. But but more the idea of, okay, the sun, like the idea they had back in the, I think, what was it, the 80s or the 90s or something like that, with the concept of the super sons, in which Jonathan and Damian Wayne, Jonathan Kent and Damian Wayne took over the mantles from their fathers, or even in the DCAU that we saw, the Batman Beyond aspect, right? Which we saw Bruce Wayne, age. We saw at the very beginning of the series, in the first episode where they talked about, where they showed that he had to come to the realization that he'd just gotten so old that he could no longer physically handle being Batman anymore, and really had to do the one thing that he said he'd never do, which was pull a gun. And then taking on, an apprentice, as it were, in Terry, right? In this case, their relationship in Batman Beyond, Bruce's relationship with Terry was different than, let's say, Bruce's relationship was with like Dick or Tim or Jason. While in many ways, Bruce served as a father figure for Terry, he was not his father or not his guardian. They were a little bit more closer to actually equals, or, Now, granted, we find out later that biologically he is actually Terry's father, as Amanda Waller basically, inadvertently stole some of, or not inadvertently, but went out and stole some of, clandestinely stole some of Bruce's DNA, and then had him cloned by placing, of course, a portion of Bruce's DNA, mixing it in with, with the McGinnis's DNA to be able to, which of course explains why Terry physically has some of the same characteristics of Bruce, even though finding out that Bruce was his biological father was a bit more disturbing for him. But, that was in the episode epilogue from Justice League Unlimited, which was a good episode. I kind of liked it. But anyways, but the idea is that keeping the same characters the same for, the exact same for, and not allowing time to do its thing. Peter, gets older, and even with his mutated DNA, eventually, maybe somebody doesn't have, maybe the guy who decides to become the new, like Miles Morales, he doesn't have to do it in the same way Peter did. He could still, and there are aspects of Spider-Man, for example, that go beyond his superpowers. I mean, people tend to also forget that Peter was actually a pretty solid scientist too. He had elements of Batman in him too, right? Very well educated, in certain areas, had, some media knowledge, just like the Golden Age Green Lantern. So, but I think the point here is that a lot of these episodic comics could still work if done right. I think the bigger problem here that is not being as addressed is that you're basically keeping the characters too stagnant over too long a period of time. You're not you're not allowing time to really. Now, granted, DC. I thought the whole multiverse concept was pretty good, having you know different different versions of the characters live out their lives in slightly different ways and having different aspects in each universe. You know, but yeah, actually, we're at the 35-minute mark. So I should probably start really speeding up on this a bit. I've been talking a lot about doing a lot of commentary on this, just kind of giving a counterpoint to each of the things he's been saying. I'm going to kind of try to breeze through this a little bit quicker here. Supporters of the big two will. Okay, yeah, we read that part. Let's see. Let me see now. Oh yeah, okay. All right, yeah. So moving on to the next paragraph here. If Marvel and DC want to be more than logo farms feeding film and streaming adaptations, they have clear choices in front of them. They can simplify continuity, offer true jumping on points that stay stable for more than a few months, and bring back single issue stories that normal people can read on their lunch break without a guidebook. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They can stop structuring their calendars around one exhausting crossover after another. Instead, treat major events as rare payoffs that reward loyal readers rather than punish them. They can retool their digital strategies so that new material appears quickly and encourages fans to treat their apps as must-have media subscriptions rather than dusty back issue warehouses. Again, a lot of these are good suggestions. The alternative is to cede the future to independents and crowd-funded projects that already behave as if the reader's time and money matter. That alternative is arriving piece by piece every time a crowdfunding campaign for a self-contained comic raises enough money to pay its team and ship on time. Quietly demonstrates that the problem is not quote unquote kids today or the death of reading. The problem is mainstream corporate model that refuses to serve its own market on reasonable terms. Again, another good point there. Like, as you guys know, we read a lot of these back single issue comics. We read a lot of these anthologies, and you know, you can learn a lot from that. I mean, we talk about it a lot on the historical comic retrospective when we do it, when we review, we not only entertain you guys, of course, by reading them in character, but we also will talk about and discuss, storytelling aspects, art aspects, as we do it, as, comparing it to how things are done today. These anthologies can, you can really fall, if you really get in, these are books, these older models, right? Can be good if they're done right. The episodic model can be done if it's done right, as they did back in the olden days. Mainstream American comics are not dead yet, but they are dying in slow motion as a mass medium. The audience still exists. It has simply learned that it does not need the big two in order to enjoy strong art, strong storytelling, and clear value. If the major publishers want to survive as anything more than IP warehouses for Hollywood, they should pay attention to where readers are going and how they are choosing to pay. crowdfunding will not save every creator, and it will not fix every problem. But right now, it looks like the only part of the field that acts as if future comics actually matters. All right, so. Yeah. Oh yeah, I think she did. All right. Anyways, all right. So with that, that's all for that story. And that was the only story we are going to read tonight, of course. I'll get ready to move on to the wrestling. Get ready to move on to the wrestling wrap up here real quick. So with that though, basically he was pointing out that I think he was talking, he's talking more about the corporate model. But if he's criticizing but if his criticism's over the more episodic model, I would have to say it's not necessarily the episodic model is a bad model. It's just how it's used, how it's done, is what the issue is. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the wrestling wrap up. As we said, we got to, we're gonna look over last night's Monday Night Raw, look ahead to tonight's NXT. As last night's Raw had a very special crossover event with the Stranger Things show that actually just ended, which I think was one of the criticisms about the show itself, was that they were crossing over with a show that had actually already ended, and that they really didn't do much in terms of helping to promote the show. Excuse me a moment, I gotta take care of something real quick, but I will put some music on while I'm gone. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. Nose is really giving me a hard time. So, anyways, let's get into the. So, on last night's Monday Night Raw, which came from the Barclays Center in New York City, it was on Netflix with Michael Cole and Corey Graves on commentary. The opening match of the evening really got started off with a bang as the WWE Women's Tag Team titles were on the line as Rhea Ripley and Io Sky defeated the Kabuki Warriors to become the new WWE Women's Tag Team Champions, which was seen as a somewhat some time coming here, as Ripley and Sky have been really picking up momentum as a team of late, and people wanted to see them. I think a lot of people wanted to see them with the titles, on them. Right now, the WWE Women's title is women's tag titles are being focused pretty much when you have a four-way feud going on between now the new champs Ripley and Sky, the most recent champions here, Kabuki Warriors of Asuka, Kairi Sane, the prior champs prior to that, Alexa Bliss and Charlotte Flair, and then the new the new tandem of Lash Legend and Nia Jax. These four teams are battling each other over the titles. This is gonna be something that's gonna be rocking for a while. While leading up, for a while now. Then you had a confrontation between Gunther and AJ Styles, in which Gunther was bragging about how he retired John Cena. He kept interrupting, AJ Styles during the promos. Anytime AJ tried to talk, he just would talk over him. AJ finally just got tired of it and slapped him. This would lead to the signing of a match for next week's Raw. So as we, of course, they are continuing this kind of legend killer gimmick with Gunther, now trying to tell out another quote unquote legend in AJ Styles. Then you had, as last night's Raw was packed with women's action. So in a match, the WWE Women's Intercontinental title, Becky Lynch regained the WWE Women's Intercontinental title over Maxine Dupree, which this match got was panned quite heavily. I think a lot of fans were not happy with this combined, that they were not happy with the work that was happening in the ring. But also, I think a lot of fans wanted to see Maxine hold on to it for a while. But a lot of the reasoning behind this is that WWE apparently wants Becky Lynch to hold on to the title, or it wants the title going into WrestleMania and a potential match with AJ Lee, who hasn't been involved in wrestling, much to a lot of people's disappointment since Survivor Series. A lot of people thought she was going to be back full time. That wasn't the case. She'll be one of those like special attraction things going on here. In other, of course, women's action scenario, another scenario that happened as Stephanie Vaquer seemed to be working with an injury to her left ankle, as it were. She was wearing a protective brace last night. She was attacked by Raquel Rodriguez, who was attacking her, trying to injure her even more. So stay tuned for that. Then in another women's match, you had Liv Morgan defeat Lyra Valkyria in just under 9 minutes, with interference from both Roxanne Perez and Bayley getting involved, with Bayley chasing Roxanne to the back with a chair. As of course Lyra was coming back in the ring, she got hit with Oblivion from Liv Morgan, who got the pinfall there. And in the main event, saw CM Punk retain the WWE World Heavyweight title over Braun Breaker in just over 26 and a half minutes. So that's all we got for last night's Monday Night Raw. So now to look ahead to tonight's NXT show, kind of go over what's going down tonight on NXT. I get there. Now, of course, there's some talk too that, and of course, Chris Jericho did not make an appearance last night, and there's some other stuff going on, making people wonder if he really, has left, because AEW still has him listed on their website. But there's still some talk that Jericho might make his return to to Raw on or to WWE at Royal Rumble at the end of the month. We'll wait and see there. So on tonight's NXT episode, New Year's Evil event. As soon as we, of course, there's some stuff going down there, as it were. Tonight's new NXT New Year's Evil 2026 coming from the Performance Center in Orlando, Florida, on the CW. Izzy and Tatum Paxley is going to be looking to get some vengeance on Izzy Dane. She'll be taking her on in a one-on-one match after Izzy Dane and the Culling turned their back on Tatum Paxley, cost her the NXT Women's Championship. Thea Hall will be defending the NXT Women's North American title against Blake Monroe. It's been talked about now that Blake Monroe may possibly be getting called up to Raw soon. Let's see. JC Jane, the current NXT Women's Champion, will be taking on Kendall Gray, who's the current Evolved Champion, I believe. Kendall Gray will have Ren Sinclair in her corner, and of course JC Jane will have the other members of Fatal Influence, including Women's Speed Champion Fallon Henley and Lainey Reed in her corner. And then Oba Femi will be defending the WWE NXT title against the TNA's X Division champion, Leon Slater. It's also been talked about that it was officially confirmed last night that Javon Evans has been called up to the Raw roster. He's been signed to the Raw roster. So you'll be seeing him more regularly on Monday Night Raw sooner rather than later. So that's all we got for the wrestling wrap-up tonight. So now we're going to start to try to wrap things up. With today being, of course, Tuesday, January the 6th, 2020, or 2026. Let's take a look back at this date in Nietzsche history. And the first thing I'd like to do is wish a very happy 90th birthday to Canadian voice actress, Corinne Orr. Now, I know many of you, maybe the name may not sound as familiar, to most people. She's done quite a bit of work there, but probably she is most known for providing the English voice of Trixie on Speed Racer. That's her biggest claim to fame. You see the picture right there. That was back in 2011. She was about 75 right there. She actually looked pretty good for 75. When you all think, but yeah, happy 90th birthday to Canadian voice actress Corinne Orr. Of course, she was known, as we said, from her time as Speed Racer's Trixie Fontaine. She was also provided the voice of Spritle and Speed's mother there. Among some of the other shows she was on Star Blazers as Queen Mariposa and Nova in the third season. Let's see. She actually portrayed herself in Reading Rainbow. Let's see. She was also in Marine Boy as Marine Boy, Neptina, Chi-Chi, and all the female characters. See, she was Salome in Flying House. She was Queen of the Crown, Ingrid Arroyo, Kiwi Kids, additional voices, adventures. So basically, but her primary role that most people knew her from was as Trixie from. So happy 90th birthday to Corinne Orr. Now moving on to the year 1951. On this date in the year 1951, which of course was 75 years ago today, the following shorts premiered in theaters on this date back in 1951. MGM's Casanova Cat, featuring, of course, Tom and Jerry from Hanna-Barbera, and Robert McKinson's Bugs Bunny cartoon Here We Go from Warner Brothers. The Warner Brothers Here We Go and MGM's Casanova Cat both premiered on this date back in 1951, which was 75 years ago. And finally, we move ahead to the year 2000. Move ahead to the year 2010, 16 years ago today. 16 years ago today, in the year 2010, Dark Horse's the fifth and final issue of Dark Horse's Gigantic went on sale on this date back in 2010. It sold for $350, 32 pages, written by Rick Remender, with Eric Nguyen on art, lettering done by Russ Wooten, Matthew Wilson doing the coloring. So, with that being said, I thank everybody for being here tonight. We'll be back, of course, here tomorrow with more Niche News. More Niche News. Also, we'll be back here on Sunday, as I'll be joined by Sabrina from Double Flyer Momentum, as we'll be taking another trip down Comics History Lane. And with that being said, I thank everybody for being here, and I hope to see everybody back here tomorrow. Bye.